data structures and data types. In this first session, we'll introduce the example questionnaire to be used throughout the course. In studying the questionnaire, we can determine the levels of data and the items needed in our data entry system. When designing your questionnaire, make sure you allow enough space for respondents to give their answers. A well laid out questionnaire is easier to complete and easier to enter data from, which in turn leads to better data quality. Are you going to use open-ended questions or coded responses? You might want to have some codes, but also include an Other Specify option. Make sure you allow space for the specified text on your questionnaire and in your data entry system. Ask just one question at a time. Avoid double-barrel questions, i.e. two or more questions in one. For examples, what were the challenges and how did you overcome them? This should be two questions. The question, do you think more or less time should have been spent on whatever? A valid answer could be yes, which doesn't actually tell us anything useful. So split the question into two. Should more time have been spent, or should less time have been spent? The link here takes us to an interesting presentation from a TED Talk about questionnaire design. When you are looking for multiple responses from a question, there are two approaches. The first approach is in some ways more flexible, as respondents can give any response and any number of responses. But we suggest restricting the number of responses you allow. For example, the question, what crops do you grow, could generate numerous responses, including some quite obscure crops. To code this question, you would need to find the respondent who had specified the greatest number of different crops and set that many variables or items in your system. Restricting this to their most important crops and specifying the number means you only need to specify that particular number of variables. Those who only grow one or two crops would leave the other variables blank. With this method, you can easily include a wide range of different crops. The other approach is to use what's often referred to as multiple dichotomy, or a set of questions each with a yes-no response. So instead of asking what crops do you grow, we specifically ask whether they grow particular crops. This approach is particularly useful if you are interested in these particular crops. You should choose the method that suits your needs. The unique identifier is either a single field or a combination of fields that uniquely identifies a single case in your data. This might be the household ID or questionnaire number, for instance. It's strongly recommended that you define a unique identifier for your data, and in CSPro this is essential. In some packages, such as Access, this is known as the primary key. It must be unique and must have a value for each case. When you have multiple levels of data, such as individuals within households, you must have a unique identifier at each level. The identifier at the lower level often includes the one from the higher level. The identifiers enable you to link the data at the different levels, which is essential for your analysis. For instance, you need to know which household a particular individual is from. There are just two data types in CSPro. The first is number. This might be a real number, such as the number of individuals in a household or the area of land, height of an individual, etc. Or it might be a numeric code, for example, 1 for male and 2 for female. CSPro doesn't have a specific data type for dates, so these should be entered as 8-digit numbers. The first 2 digits are for the day, the next 2 for the month, and the last 4 are for the year. The alpha data type is for text values. These are used for open-ended questions. They could be fairly short, as in the variables for other specify responses. We mentioned other specify earlier when we talked about questionnaire design. When developing the data entry system, users sometimes forget to add an extra variable for the specified text. The alpha data type is also used for longer comments, such as often appear at the end of questionnaires. When you come to define your data dictionary, you will need to specify a length for each variable. This is the number of spaces needed to record the data you're expecting for the variable. In other words, this is the number of digits or characters that you want to allow. For example, if you have codes that range from 1 to 30, you will need a length of 2 as you need to accommodate 2 digits. If you have numbers that range from 0 to 999 and you want to allow for 2 decimal places, then the length should be 6, 3 before the decimal, 2 after, and don't forget 1 for the decimal point itself. For text fields, you will need to estimate the length needed according to the question. For a person's name, for instance, a length of... For comments, you might consider 200 or even more characters, and you should set the length accordingly. For variable names, we recommend keeping them short. Long names are allowed, but you are likely to find they're a nuisance when you come to programming, as you'll have to type them out in full each time you use them. Also, exporting to other packages might be an issue with longer names. In the past, many statistics packages didn't cope with variable names longer than 8 characters, and many older programmers still try to stick to using just 8 to 10 characters for the variable names. We suggest you develop some kind of naming convention for your variables, as this can make it easier to understand. Some like to use names that match the question number. For example, S3QN2 for question 2 of section 3. One issue with this, of course, is that a single question often requires several variables. Another option may be to use something that indicates the meaning. For instance, prod timb might be for the question, do you produce timber? A combination of these two methods could give something like QN2P TIMB. Different levels within the questionnaire are not always easy to spot. And we have a couple of examples here, which are both as tables in the questionnaire. So if we say, which of the following practices have you adopted? This table, looking at farming practices, in each row a different practice is shown, such as improved crop varieties, cover crops, etc. For each practice we have 4 questions. Was the practice implemented? If so, did you have any help? And what were the main challenges and main benefit? Effectively then, we have 16 questions here, and we would expect 16 responses. Therefore, we need 16 variables in our data set to store this data. These data are all at the same level as the questionnaire. Now, the second example, where we say list the types of fertilizer used and the crops this was applied to, we have the number of rows, and hence the number of responses is not fixed. Some households may have just 1 or 2 types of fertilizer, while others might have used 4 or 5. Some might have used none at all. To avoid storing lots of blank variables, we need these data at a different level, the fertilizer level. Each household can have none, 1, or many cases at the fertilizer level. So now it's your turn. We want you to use the baseline household level questionnaire provided on the Moodle site, and we want you to determine the primary key, work out how many levels of data there are, assign suitable variable names throughout the questionnaire, work out the length and type of each variable you need. Do you need decimal places on any of the variables? Don't forget to allow the space for the decimal point. Don't forget any other specify fields. A practical handout is available on the Moodle site. You might find it easier to print out a copy of this and a copy of the questionnaire. In the handout there are several questions. Record your answers as you'll need them for the quiz at the end of this topic. Good luck.